Hey guys, Billy here. I'm a multi-gladiator hunter, and this video is a solo shuffle guide for BM Hunter in Dragonflight Season 1. This video is much longer than any other one I've produced due to popular demand for a longer guide and also to see some gameplay within the guide. I've broken it down into sections so that it's easier for you guys to navigate, and I just want to thank everyone in the Discord for letting me know what you guys wanted within this guide, as it massively helps me when I'm planning the video. Let me know if there are any other videos you guys would like to see, and don't forget to subscribe to ensure that you won't miss out on any of the other Hunter content. You can catch me live on Twitch at twitch.tv/Billybobbs, and you can join my Discord. I'll put the links to both of these in the description, and I hope you enjoy the video. One thing that I get asked quite a lot is what I think of BM in Solo Shuffle. So I think that BM in Solo Shuffle is extremely good, however it does have some drawbacks. The main of these drawbacks is that BM does die, especially if you can't kite very well. So this means that BM is often the target, especially for comps that like melee cleaves or ones that just cleave. So for example, ferals or DHs. And this can make your life really hard because getting trained as a hunter isn't really that fun. And if you're not able to kite, then you will just die very quickly, so it'll be hard for you to win the rounds. So yeah, that's one of the main drawbacks of BM and just hunter in general, to be honest. The second drawback is that if the games are short, then BM is not very good. The reason for this is that BM relies on longer games for the dampening to ramp up so that your damage becomes unhealable. You don't have any burst really as BM, so the long games is what you need to secure victory. Whereas other classes, for example warriors or DHs, they just want to do as much damage as they can in the opener and try and force a kill as quickly as possible. But BM does need those longer games in order to be useful because you need to get the stun traps, and you need to be able to rot them down and just do the damage. Otherwise, the healer will just be able to heal through it, especially when the dampening isn't that high. So yeah, overall, I think BM is incredibly good in Shuffle. It does have those two drawbacks which I just mentioned, but some of the positives are the damage is insane, so if the game goes on long enough, you're almost guaranteed to win as long as no one feeds, because your damage is just too high and the healer will not be able to heal it. Secondly, you have very good CC, for example, with your trap, your stun, your scatter, your steel trap, and then tar trap as well. So the CC is really strong, and you can CC almost the entire team. So CC is definitely a positive for BM Hunter and just Hunter in general. And then you also have the ability to kite fairly well if you're good at it, being that you have freedom, you have Roar of Sacrifice, you've got tar trap, steel trap, disengage. So there's a lot of stuff that you can use to kite as well. So overall, I think BM is very, very good in Shuffle, but I found that it has got easier as you get higher rating because the games are in general a little bit longer, but there are still some lobbies which make playing BM very difficult. For example, the cleave lobbies that only rely on damage and they want to end the game as quickly as possible, because in those lobbies you're not that useful as BM, because the games don't last long enough. So yeah, that is my overall thoughts on BM in Solo Shuffle. Okay, so next I'll be talking about the general talents, which I think you should be running in most shuffles. There are some things that you can change, but I'll just show you the basics first and then explain which ones are changeable. So this is the current build which I'd recommend running for almost every solo shuffle. The only things that I'd recommend changing are you can change Scatter Shot for Binding Shot, say if you're playing with a mage on your team, because then Scatter isn't that good because the mage is going to be polying a lot and Scatter will just DR the poly. And then Binding Shot is good because you don't really have that many stuns on the mage, so that's when Binding can be good. The other thing which I'd say you can change out is that you can take 1 point out of Natural Mending and 1 out of Rejuvenating Wind and put them into Wilderness Medicine. The times when I'd recommend playing this are when the enemies can go on your pet. So for example, versus cleave comps, so feral DK, just ferals in general, and maybe stuff like DHs, which will cleave your pet as well. There is something to note, do not play this if you are facing a Shadow Priest or an Ellie or an Affliction Warlock. The reason for this is that whenever a pet will dispel one of the effects, so for example a UA, or a Flame Shock or a VT, then you'll get feared stunned or feared silenced, or take damage from the control of lava. So do not run it into that. It's not really worth it. Just keep normal Petment up. But yeah, you'll take a lot of damage from those three, or you'll be constantly feared or silenced, and that's really frustrating to play. And then on this side, the only thing which I suggest you could really change if you want to, is you could take a point out of Dire Beast and put it into Wild Call. not Wild Call, sorry, into Brutal Companion. And this basically makes your pet's special attack. So, for example, if you run with like a River Beast or a Hyena, it will do Bite. It'll just make that hit a bit harder, but I do prefer playing with Dire Beast, and I would recommend staying with Dire Beast. So yeah, like there's not really that many talents you should change it into Shuffle. I guess if you're playing against loads of casters and you don't really want Steel Trap, you could swap this out and maybe take reduced AoE damage. But in general, I do think that this is the best talents, and you should really only swap out the Natural Mending, the Rejuvenating Wind for Wilderness Medicine, Scatter for binding when you don't really have a reliable stun, or when you're playing with a mage. And then on this side, if you want to, you can swap out Dire Beast for Brutal Companion. The rest of the stuff I'd always keep the same. So yeah, that's it for the normal talents in Shuffle. In Shuffle, Hunter has quite a few honor talents which you can run. The only ones which I'd recommend you avoid are Dire Beast Hawk, Basilisk, Interlope, and they're the main three that I would avoid. The other ones are all can be useful, but some are more useful than others. So the ones which I normally run are Royal Sacrifice, Survival Tactics, and Chimeral Sting. Into anything but an Evoker or a Rdruid. Into an Evoker or a Rdruid, you're going to want to play Tranquilizing Darts instead, just because it reduces their overall healing by quite a lot. Other talents which are situational are Wild Kingdom, if you think they're going to go your pets quite a lot, or they're going to cleave your pets and you won't be able to top them even with Pet Mend. So for example, maybe versus Ellie Shadow Priest, or like Ellie Affliction, where they're going to be doing a lot of damage to your pets and you can't run the increased pet heal, Wild Kingdom might be good. Diamond Ice into say maybe D8 Shadow Priest, if you're not certain that you're going to be able to get like kick the reverse or kick the master spells and stop the reverses. But in general, I don't run Diamond Ice that often. Kindred Beast is really good versus say double melee where you need to kite a lot and you're using Freedom Pet. Trank Darts is just very good into Evokers and Restorators in general. It can also be good into Mages as well. Hunting Pack, I haven't really used this one much, but it can be good if you're going to need to kite a lot, as it will reduce Treacher's cooldown by a good amount. But in general, Hunting Pack's probably the least used of the ones that I said. Chimeral Sting is very, very good, and it's very useful into stuff like Discs, Holy Paladin, Holy Priest, and also Resto Shaman. So Chimeral Sting is a very good talent to run. Dragon Scale Armor is good if you're facing casters that do magical dots. So for example, Affliction Warlocks. Interlope is very difficult to use, and in general it's not that good. It can potentially be used into other hunters, but I wouldn't really recommend it. Then the Beast from Within is good into stuff where you get feared a lot. So for example, Warlocks, like a Warlock with a Priest, and when you don't need the other talents. So yeah, in general, I'd normally stick with Survival Tactics and Ross as locked in. The only time you don't really need Ross is if you're, say, against like an Affliction or double Affliction, then you could run Beast from Within and Chimeral instead. But yeah, in general, there are a lot of honor talents which you can use. I will put up a spreadsheet on the screen so that you can see roughly what I would take into each comp, as well as the priority into certain classes. But your honor talents will differ quite a lot depending on what you're facing. So yeah, there's not really a set three that I can just say you run all the time. The one which I'd say I run the most is Survival Tactics, just because how good it is, especially in Shuffle. Having that huge shield whenever you feign death is extremely helpful. Another question which I get quite a lot is which honor talents to run into certain classes. And although this varies quite a lot depending on the comp, I've made a list here to try and help you guys decide when to use what talents versus each class. So there's a priority system where highest being the highest priority and lowest obviously being the lowest. And if it's the highest priority, if you see any of these classes on the enemy team, then this is the one which you're going to want to run. And then lowest being the lowest. So for example, the only time you'd ever really run Beast from Within is against maybe a Shadow play with a Mistweaver, say, where you don't need the Trank Darts. But for example, if you're facing like any sort of Restorator or Evoker, Trank Darts becomes the highest priority, even if, say, you're facing, I don't know, a caster like a Lock, where you might want to run Beast from Within, you'd run Trank Darts instead. So in general, the four highest priority are Royal Sacrifice, Survival Tactics, Trank Darts, and Chimeral Sting. So you pretty much always run Ross against almost every class really, apart from things that don't really crit. So like Shadow Priest or Athlete Warlock, they're pretty much the only ones where I wouldn't recommend running Royal Sacrifice all the time, but even then it still can be pretty decent. Survival tactics I run versus almost everything, especially in this fast meta. The shield that you get when you feign death can save your life. So yeah, I recommend survival tactics almost all the time. It is risky going it, but if you know for a fact they're not going to go you, then it might be worth running it, not running it. But in general, I pretty much always run survival tactics. As for the third, I normally run trank darts if the enemy healer is a Rdruid or an evoker, or sometimes if there's a mage in the enemy team as well. But when it's a mage, you can also choose with Chimeral Sting. But if it's a Rdruid or an evoker, you pretty much need to lock in trank darts 100%. So, for example, versus a Rdruid with 2 melee, you're going to want to run Ross survival tactics with trank darts. However, if you don't need trank darts, then the option that you can pick is Chimeral Sting. So I put this behind trank darts because if it's a Rdruid, you want to want trank darts above Chimeral. But if, say, it's a disc healer, you would want to run Chimeral Sting instead of trank darts because trank darts isn't that useful. The other honor talents which can be useful are Diamond Ice, and this is when you're playing with something that will break your traps or against, say, a DH and a Shadow Priest. I wouldn't really ever run Diamond Ice in real threes, but in Shuffle it can be good. For example, if you're with an Unholy DK and you're against maybe a Shadow Priest with a DH. Because at that point, you're not really ever going to get traps that aren't going to get broken by either your own team or the enemy MDing it or reversing it. So then Diamond Ice can be really valuable. It can also be useful if you want to trap DPS. Wild Kingdom. This is very good versus stuff that kills your pets, so like Feral, Ellie, Affley, or DH. So as long as you don't need to run the other 3 talents, Wild Kingdom can definitely be a good alternative. The priority for Wild Kingdom can go up to the highest if you know for a fact they're going to focus your pets and you're not going to be able to keep it alive. Because as a BM, if your pet dies, you do very little damage, and it's pretty much a loss if you can't get your pet back within a certain amount of time. So Wild Kingdom is medium, but it can go to highest depending on what you face. Hunting Pack is the lowest priority. I don't think I've ever run Hunting Pack in Dragonflight. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend ever really running Hunting Pack unless there's literally nothing else you can run. But even then, there's normally other better alternatives. Dragon Scale is good versus dot casters, so like Affliction or Boomy. But again, you're not really going to run it that often because you're likely to want to use other talents like Trank Darts or Survival Tactics. So the third one is very rarely to be Dragon Scale Armor, but it can be useful, and I put it in here just in case you guys wanted to run it. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend it that often. Beast from Within is slightly higher priority than Dragon Scale, and I have run this a few times, especially versus stuff that fears a lot. So, for example, Locks or Priests, where you don't need, say, Roar of Sacrifice. So say you're facing a Shadow Play with a disc, the talents which you could run would be Survival Tactics, Beast from Within, and Chimeral Sting, or you could swap Chimeral Sting for maybe Roar of Sacrifice. So yeah, this is like a quick overview of the talents into different comps. But in general, I've put when to use these sort of talents and the priorities. So yeah, I'm repeating myself a bit, but it is quite important. With the highest priority, you basically always want to run it, as long as there's one of the classes that are in here. Medium it can be useful, or it can be even highest depending on what you're facing. Yep, and then lowest is pretty much if you have the free slots, you can run something, but it's not going to be make or break if you play it. And in general, there are normally better options. So yeah, I hope this helped, and that this explains the honor talents and when to run them a little bit better. Okay, so the next most requested thing from you guys is to discuss about the different specs in Shuffle and how good they are against and with BM Hunter in Shuffle. So I've divided this list into how happy I am to see one of the specs in the lobby. For example, Feral I've put as very sad. The reason for this is that when it's against you, it will completely counter you, even though you do quite well with it. So it's not about just when you're facing the specs, it's also about when they're on your team and just in general when they're in the lobby. So the specs which when I see in the lobby I'm very happy are all 3 mage specs, Destro, and then for the healers, Disc and Holy. The reason for 3 mage specs are that Hunter completely counters mage. The reason for this is that you do extremely high damage into mages, and they can't really do that much into you because you've got Roar of Sacrifice, you can Freedom, you have Range Kick, and in general you just have quite a few buttons which can disrupt the Mage as well. Mage on your team also isn't awful, it's not as good, but you can still get some long CC chains with triple poly into stun, into say fear if you have a priest on your team. And in general, Mage does quite a lot of damage, so it can be good with BM Hunter. So yeah, in general, I'd definitely put mages at the top tier, and I'm always happy when I see a mage in a shuffle. Then I'll put Destro as well. The reason for Destro is similar to Mage, as in you do extremely high damage into Destro, you're able to line almost all of their casts as BM, and they're not that disruptive when you're trying to trap. So in general, Destro is quite an easy class to face. When they're with you, it's not awful, because they do, again, high amounts of damage, and they're normally the target. This allows you to get traps much easier as well. I'll go off over the healers in a bit, and I'll just go through the DPS specs first. DH, you might be surprised to see me put it here, but as a BM, you have quite a lot of stuff to deal with DH. For example, you have Scattershot, Tar Trap Root, and Steel Trap. These can be really, really good versus DH because it just completely removes them from the game, as they don't really have anything to remove it. And in general, when BM is on your, when DH is on your team, they do a lot of damage. They might break some traps, but in general, they're not the worst class to be on your team either, because they bring stuff like Darkness, which is a great defensive, and as well as CCs such as stuns, which is what Hunter lacks. And they also have an Imprison, which can be used on the healer or the off target. So in general, I put DH in happy tier, as I'm quite happy when I face them. Windwalker I've not faced too much, but whenever I face them, it's been fairly good. The reason for this is that, again, you just shred them as a BM hunter, and they have to kite a lot. They only really kill in goes, and Roar of Sacrifice can completely counter their goes. You can also use Scatter on their fists, and then still trap them into Tar Trap Root if they Tiger's Lust. So in general, Windwalker is not that bad to face as hunter. When it's on your team, it's fairly good because they bring a reliable stun. They bring a little bit of CC with Paralyze on the off target, and in general, they're not awful with you. So yeah, Windwalker, I'm fairly happy when I face it. Demo, I put in happy tier instead of very happy. The reason for this is that when they're on your team, they often break your traps, which is frustrating. And also when they're against you, they can stun even when they're stunned, and this can make it much harder for you to get traps. But they do suffer from being very weak to BM Hunter, as in you can just do a lot of damage to them. So yeah, in general, they're not great, but I'm definitely happy when I see one in the lobby. Again, healers I will go over last. I'm indifferent when I face a BM or a survival hunter. The reason for this is BM, when they're against you, they just do very similar stuff to what you'll do. So they're not amazing, but they're not the worst either. And then when they're with you, it's still a good comp. Like double BM isn't bad. You'll do a lot of single target damage. You have a lot of CC with trap, into stun, and then your healer can often do something else as well. So yeah, BM, I'm not too happy, but I'm not sad when I face it either. It's almost exactly the same with survival. The only downside of survival is that if you say have an Assa rogue on your team, survival will be able to mending bandage, but survival has a lot of the same bonuses as to BM when you're playing with them. So in general, it's not bad. Boomy, when you're against them, they can be quite annoying, but they do take quite a lot of damage, and you are able to counter their main CC, which is Root Beam, with a Freedom on your healer. You do need to watch out for their clones, which is why I've put them in indifferent tier instead of happy, because a good Boomy will often clone, and this can severely disrupt your team's damage, as well as your ability to live and kite. So yeah, in Boomy, I'm not happy when I face them, but I'm also not sad. Fury does quite well when it's on your team, just for the high amount of damage which it does. And when you're against it, you have quite a lot of stuff to kite it with. The only reason it's not in S tier is because they have quite a lot of mobility and they can kill your healers, or your other DPS, and there's not as much you can do to peel. And they don't die that easily anymore after the buffs. So yeah, Fury, it's not awful, but not great. Shadow Priest, after the nerfs, I put in indifferent. It used to be in happy tier, but now it's indifferent because Scatter is no longer as good as it was, but they're still annoying to face because of the MDs on traps. So you need to be very quick with kicking the MD if you want to get reliable CC. But I've put them in indifferent instead of sad because they're very good when they're on your team still, especially in shuffle. And they will die once you're doing damage to them. If they press Dispersion, they are a very good kill target. Assa Rogue I've put in Indifferent instead of Sad, just because you are able to kill Assa Rogue, and when it's on your team, Thug is a very, very strong comp. So, in general, Assa isn't that bad for BM, especially because you have range kick, and you can do quite a lot of stuff to disrupt them. For example, use Scatter or Steel Trap on the Rogue, and that's normally quite a good counter to them. Sub, I've put in this tier as well, for a similar reason to Assa, is that you have quite a lot of stuff to disrupt them, and the only time they really kill is with one-shots, and you can normally counter that with Roar of Sacrifice, and you can also run Tank Pet versus Sub, and this makes you much more tanky. For Sad tier now, I've put firstly Brewmaster Monk. I haven't faced any Brewmaster Monks since they got buffed, however I have heard from multiple other hunters that it is extremely miserable to face them. The reason for this is they have a lot of CC, they're able to tank a lot of damage, and they're able to eat a lot of traps as well. They're also not very good on your team because all of their CC DRs with yours, and in general they just do an extremely high amount of damage for a tank, so I'm not happy really when I face Brewmaster Monk. Marksman as well, I'm not happy when I face them because they do very high amounts of burst damage and they want to try and win the game early. BM is the opposite, whereas you want to make the game last longer. So basically it's the opposing playstyles, and in general Marksman can be annoying to face because you have to line a lot of their casts, and especially if you're lower MMR, people will normally not respect the Marksman's damage, so they'll just get full damage and they can often kill before you get a chance to ramp up your damage. Unholy is also in this tier because they're not very good when they're on your team because they will break every trap. And without coordinated damage, you won't really be able to force that many cooldowns, especially if the Unholy is the target, because then they'll have to kite. And in general, the games in Shuffle are not long enough for this comp to be that good. In threes, it is very good though, but yeah, in Shuffle, it's not as good. Also, when they're against you, they will often cleave your pet a lot. They'll cleave everyone on the team, and especially in Shuffle when there's not that much coordination, people will overlap cooldowns, and this is extremely bad against DK, because it means that one of your teammates can die very easily, and there's not that much you can do to peel them. The reason Frost is in Sad and not Indifferent is because they are extremely good at killing your pets. And in Shuffle, a lot of healers don't really pay attention to pet health, so even through Exhilaration and a pet mend, your pets can still die. So yeah, and also when they're with you, they will just die because you can't really peel them. They need a class that can peel them, and they win in goes, and in Shuffle it's not normally long enough to last until they get their second go or third go, which they would need to kill. So yeah, in general, Frost isn't great. Enhar I put in Sad instead of Very Sad because it isn't quite as bad as Ellie, but they still don't do that well with Hunter. And against Hunter, they are very annoying because of the fact that they have grounding. They're able to do an extremely high amount of damage as well. So in general, Enhar isn't the best to face in Shuffle, just because it makes it much harder to trap. They don't really synergize that well with Hunter because all the CC that they do DRs with yours, and they're able to kill your teammates very easily as well. The reason Athlete is in Sad instead of Indifferent or Happy is because they just do extremely high amounts of damage and they can rot your pets as well. In threes, I like facing Athlete, but in Shuffle, I don't think it's as good because they will just rot your pets down, and your healers don't normally heal the pets enough. So this means that you'll often lose your pets, you'll have to turtle. And yeah, in general, it's not the best idea. You also can't run the improved pet mend into them because then you'll be silenced all the time. They also don't synergize well with you. They'll just do lots of damage, which is great, but whenever you trap or scatter, it removes all of their dots, and that makes them very sad, because then they won't do any damage. So yeah, in general, Athlete is not very good, but the reason it's in Sad instead of Very Sad is that they do die, especially when they're on the enemy team, because Hunter does a lot of damage to Warlock. Ret is now in Sad tier instead of Indifferent or Happy, because PHP is a good comp, but against you in Shuffle, Ret can be really annoying because you need cross EC on them, otherwise they're going to dispel every trap. They're also able to use Sank to remove your stuns on the healer, which makes trapping a lot harder. They also have a decent amount of defensive cooldowns now with Bubble and Shield of Vengeance, especially in matches like Shuffle, which aren't generally very long. They also have extremely high amounts of burst and they want to end the game quickly. So yeah, they're not the best against Hunter, and they're also not the best with. Outlaw I've put in Sad because I haven't faced it that much in Shuffle, but it seems slightly more annoying than Sub or Assa due to the fact that they just have really long CC chains, and if you're not synergized well with the Outlaw, you'll often overlap when you're on their team. And then against you, they often have free reign, and they're just going to be able to either kill you or your healer or one of your or the other DPS. So in general, I think Outlaw is probably the hardest rogue spec to face in Shuffle, because they have short evasion and short blind as well, which makes them much more annoying to face. And then arms, I put in this tier. I haven't faced as many arms warriors recently, but this is a fairly weird class as they just do extremely high amounts of damage, but it's also very scripted, so you can predict it quite well with Roar of Sacrifice, but often your pets will die just to cleave and your healers aren't healing them. You also don't do that well with a warrior, just due to the fact that you don't have any real peel, or like healing as a team aside from your healer. So this can often mean that you will just flop over and die. And in general, warriors can be quite difficult to kill because they have intervene, they have die by the sword, and they have stuff like War Banner and Rally, and this can make it much harder to face as they can keep their team alive quite well. They also have stuff like Fear as well, which is undispellable. So yeah, in general, warriors are quite annoying to face in Shuffle. And now for the tier that makes me very sad. And firstly is Feral. This might seem a bit weird, but I really hate facing Ferals in Shuffle. The reason for this is that when they're against you, they cleave all of your pets. And the downside of them cleaving your pets is that they get more bites, and that's a lot more single target. They also want to finish the lobby as quickly as possible because they do a massive amount of damage in the first minute of the game and then they start to trail off until they get their next incarn. This is the complete opposite to BM as you want the games to be slightly longer. So when you're against a feral, the fact that you have to keep using lots of globals to mend your pet and move your pet to keep it alive, or your healer has to try and heal it, it just means that you lose a lot of damage uptime on the feral and whilst they're cleaving your team. Also in Shuffle, because the dampening is so high, Ferals are extremely strong and they're able to just do a lot of damage to your entire team, and you don't really have much peel as a BM Hunter against this. But however, when they are on your team, you do very well because Feral and Hunter as jungle does scale or does do really well into almost everything. So yeah, that's why they're in very sad, because they are just a hard counter to face. Ellie is similar to Feral, as in it's a hard counter to face because they'll dot all your pets with Flame Shock and then they'll do unlimited damage with the Meatballs or Lava Bursts. So yeah, Ellie is not fun to face because they also have stuff like Grounding and Tremor, which can completely disrupt CC chains. And yeah, when they're on your team, they DR all your CC, they will break every trap. And in general, Ellie is probably the worst class which you can face in solo shuffle as a BM Hunter. And then for the never faced, I've just put them here because I've never faced them. I will give them a ranking, but do keep in mind I have never faced them. Blood DK I feel would be in the indifferent tier, just because they'll do a decent amount of damage, but they don't really bring any kill potential. Prot Warrior would probably be in Sad, just due to the fact they have the general warrior survivability things, such as War Banner and Rally, as well as stuff like Intervene. So in general, Prots probably wouldn't be that fun to face. Vengeance DH, I honestly have no idea how much damage they do, but I have a feeling I'd probably be in Sad. But yeah, I can't really comment on Vengeance because I've actually never seen them in an arena. Guardian, I would put as sad or indifferent. The reason for this is they're just going to do extremely high amounts of damage and just be quite a nuisance, really. And they won't sync that well with you because they'll break every trap. And in general, I don't think Guardian would be that good with Hunter. Prot Palette I would put as very sad. The reason for this is that they can dispel every single trap that you do. They don't really sync well with BM Hunter at all. And against you, they also have a double bot. They've got Blessing of Sanctuary. They've got the Immune Angel. So yeah, in general, Prot would not be that fun to face as a BM Hunter. I'll go over the healers now quickly. So Disc I put as very happy. The reason for this is Disc is very easy to trap. They do very high amounts of damage, which syncs well with the BM Hunter. And they often can't heal your damage later into Dampening as well. They also have very good defensives, such as double PS, Dome, and Swap. So in general, I've put Disc as very happy when I face it. Holy, I put in very happy because you hard counter it when you face it, because they cannot heal the BM Hunter damage. and they're also quite easy to trap. When they're with you, however, they do good amounts of healing, and they are able to keep you alive fairly well, especially with Guardian Angel syncing quite well with Exhilaration and BM. So yeah, in general, Holy I put in S tier. I'm always happy when I see a Holy Priest. In Happy tier, I put Holy Pala. The reason Holy Pala isn't in Very Happy is because they have double bop. This completely negates all of your damage as BM Hunter, especially if you don't have a Purge on your team. Because yeah, like you won't do any damage through the bop, so you'd have to swap targets. They also have stuff like Bubble and Sacrifice, as well as being able to taunt pets, which can make it harder to trap. But in general, Holy Pala doesn't really have the healing output to heal with BN damage, so if you're able to get through the double bop, then you are likely to be able to land a kill. Holy Pala also isn't bad with BM, because they do good amounts of healing, they bring some decent CC as well. So yeah, in general, Holy Pala isn't bad. Resto Shaman is also similar to Holy Paladin, as they can't really heal BM Hunter damage. The reason they're in Happy instead of Very Happy is because they have stuff like totems, which will root your pets. They have grounding, which makes it slightly harder to trap, or it can reduce the team damage. And they have stuff like Link, which is an extremely good defensive in Solo Shuffle. So that's the reason they're in Happy and not Very Happy. Next, I'll go over Resto Druids in Shuffle. So Resto Druid is probably the worst healer, apart from Mistweaver Monk, that you can face in Shuffle. The reason for this is they're quite difficult to trap. They do a lot of healing, but the reason they're in indifferent instead of sad or very sad is that you have trunk darts, and this can completely counter a Resto Druid because it reduces their healing by a lot. So yeah, in general, Resto Druids are not great, but they're also not awful either. Because you are able to land a kill fairly quickly into bad ones, and the good ones, the games will go on longer, and then they just won't be able to heal the BM Hunter damage. So yeah, in general, Resto Druid isn't awful, but it's not great. And then the lowest healer on the list is Mistweaver Monk. The reason I put this in very sad is that when they're against you, they're extremely difficult to trap. They have very good cooldowns with Life Cocoon, and if they're playing Fist Weaving, they can also hit your pets, so that even if you and your other DPS and healer are aligning, they're still able to hit the pets and heal. And this can be extremely annoying because your only other option is to not send in the pets, but that's normally not a viable option. They also do not sync well at all with BM Hunter, as all of their CC DRs with yours, and every time you feign death, their Soothing Mist will get cancelled, and this reduces their healing by a lot. So in general, Mistweaver is by far the worst healer to face. And now I'll just go over the two new specs in this list, and that is Preservation Evoker, which I've put at Happy. The reason for this is similar to Resto Druid, as in Trank Darts will completely counter Evoker, but as a hunter, the Evoker can't really heal your damage that well, and if you switch targets fairly often and you hit the Evoker, then they'll lose a lot of healing. So yeah, in general, Evoker isn't that bad to face. You just purge on cooldown and you just do as much damage as you can, and they won't be able to heal it. And when they're on your team, they're fairly good, as they have quite a lot of saves, they've got a lot of cooldowns available to them, and they have a fear or their sleepwalk, so that can be extremely good for extending CC chains. So yeah, in general, Evoker I put in Happy tier. As for DPS Evoker, I've not faced it too much, but I put it in indifferent tier. The reason for this is that it's very gimmicky and it's pretty much only a one-shot spec. This spec will do extremely high amounts of damage in the first 30 seconds of the game in a one-shot, but after that they're completely useless and they just kite. So when you're against them, you just do damage to them, you live the one shot with Roar of Sacrifice, and hope your team does as well. And then you'll just be able to kill them if they don't kite very well, and if they do kite, you can kill the other DPS. And when they're on your team, they're not amazing because they just do that one initial burst. But if you're able to live to the second burst, then it's likely that you're going to win on that as a hunter, because at that point dampening will be high, and they won't be able to heal your damage and the evoker burst. So that's all for this tier list, and if you don't agree, do let me know which ones you would change around and why. I'll just do a short section where I describe the general game plan of a BM Hunter in Solo Shuffle. So the general idea is that you want to do damage whilst not taking any damage. This is much easier said than done, but there are a few things which I will tell you to try and help you with this. So firstly, you don't need to worry about trapping as much as you would in regular 3s. The reason for this is that in Solo Shuffle damage is much higher. And the dampening rounds are much quicker, so the games in general are much shorter. So you'll probably only get a few CCs in the game anyway, so it's not worth going and trading your cooldowns in order to get the CC. However, if you can get CC on cooldown, it is much better, but it's not normally worth trading, say, Turtle or Exil or Wall just to try and get a trap. Because a lot of the time it will get broken, especially if you have, say, a melee on your team. Secondly, you need to try and control the other DPS on the enemy team. You can do this with Steel Trap, Scatter, and Tar Trap. You pretty much want to use Tar Trap on cooldown just to try and kite away. Steel Trap is insane against classes such as Rogue because they have no way to remove it aside from Sprint, and that's a 2-minute cooldown. So Scatter is really good, and then it's also really good versus DH as well. I meant Steel Trap, sorry, not Scatter. Scatter is then very good versus almost everything, apart from if you're playing with, say, a Mage, because then the Mage will poly, and at that point you can run Binding Shot. But in general, Scatter is very good at just disrupting the enemy team. It can be used on Windwalker's Fists, or when a DH is meted, just to try and stop a little bit of the damage. You want to use Royal Sacrifice on the target who's being gone on. So for example, if it's you, then use it on yourself, or your healer, then use it on your healer. You want to use Freedoms pretty much on cooldown to try and just get the target away from the enemy. And then if you're not the target, you want to try and be as far away from the enemy as possible and close to the enemy healer. If you are the target, you want to try and be far-ish away from your healer but still in line of sight, and just kiting away from the enemy DPS. You want to try and take as little damage as you can. So a lot of the time versus, say, casters, it is okay even if you don't trap like in the whole game, or you only trap like once, because you will just do unhealable damage as long as you don't die. And if your team know the game plan and they don't die either, then your damage will just become unhealable at around 2 minutes into the game. So it's a very different playstyle than it has been in previous expansions where you needed a lot of setup to kill. But because the BN damage is now so crazy, you can just kill without needing the CC. And obviously you're not the only one who can CC in the match, so often your other DPS will be CCing as well. Just Hunters are very squishy, so you don't want to take the damage in order to just get CC, unless you know for a fact that you, say, win on that trap. So that is the general game plan of a BM Hunter in Shuffle. Just do damage and don't take damage, and try and kite away from the enemy as much as you can, because you can always be moving because you don't have any casts. Okay, so for this next part of the video, I'm going to be talking about something which isn't technically solo shuffle gameplay. However, I would argue that it's very important in order to get higher CR in shuffle and improve. And that is the attitude to have when playing solo shuffle. Firstly, I would say to try and avoid being toxic. This sounds really obvious, but the reasons for this are you could get chat muted, and that means it's much harder to communicate with your team about what target you want to go on, or if you want to do a swap, because you can't communicate with your team because there's no voice. Also, the person that you're flaming is very rarely to play better because you flame them. If anything, it's just going to make them play worse. If they're a lower player who's playing a higher MMR than they're used to, they might get scared and not press buttons that they would have otherwise because they think you're going to flame them. Or they might even get a personal vendetta against you and therefore try and throw your rounds or just play really well when they're against you. So yeah, flaming doesn't help anyone. It can also make you more tilted and therefore you might play worse. So yeah, flaming is bad. Do not do it. On the flip side, constructive criticism is helpful, but do make sure that it is constructive and not just flaming someone. The second point is to think about what you can do each round instead of blaming your teammates. If you get into a habit of just blaming your teammates, then you are not going to improve that much in Shuffle. There are exceptions to this. For example, if your DH goes in behind a pillar and dies within 3 seconds of the gates opening without using any cooldowns, there's not much you could have done. However, if the game is between 1 to 2 minutes long, there's almost always something which you could have done differently. It might not have won you the game, however, it's always worth focusing on this, just so that you can improve your own gameplay, and in general have a higher likelihood of winning the next rounds and just improving yourself as a player. Thirdly, this is very specific to Shuffle, but it's also very important, and that is randomly trapping and not looking at DRs. You need to make sure that you're paying very close attention to DRs, especially as classes that need CC, for example Hunter or Mage. The reason for this is that sometimes people do CC randomly, so it's important to be aware so that you can maximize the value of your CC, as you only really have the long CC of a trap as a hunter, so yeah, it's always good to get the full value out of it. For example, when playing with a Mistweaver, I would normally ask them in the starting gates to not paralyze the healer, just so that they don't DR the trap. However, it's still important to look, just in case they pressed it because they thought they could force a kill, or maybe they even accidentally pressed it. Finally, this is also very important, and it's probably the same for any sort of game, but that is not the tilt. Shuffle is extremely punishing when you tilt, because say you lose 6 rounds in a row, you'll get into a lobby next round, and if you're tilted, you are likely to play worse, and therefore you might even lose the next 6 rounds. And if this happens, you're going to be almost 300 mml lower than when you started, and this can lead into a vicious cycle of you being tilted, playing badly, and then losing even more rating. So if you are tilted after a shuffle, what I recommend is just having a break for a little bit and then coming back when you're less tilted, even if it's say the next day, as playing when you're tilted is never really a good idea, as it normally just ends in you losing more rating and losing more rounds which you would win if you weren't tilted. So now I'll go over some commentary of actual gameplay so that you guys can see what I'm doing as I play the games. So we're facing a marksman hunter with a mage, and this is quite good for us, so we're just going to start on the mage. I kick the poly just to try and stop some of the initial CC. I run into the priest to try and get a trap, but he fears me on this, and it's not too bad, but they are blasting my windwalker. So I need to try and stop the priest from doing damage, so I stun him into a full trap, and now I'm just doing damage to the mage. I decide to sack the windwalker just to reduce some of the damage that he's taking. I now see the marksman hunter coming near me, so I try and run away from him a little bit just in case he wants to say trap me or try and scatter me, as getting CC'd here would reduce my damage by quite a lot. I now see that there's a Roar of Sacrifice on the mage, but he's still low, so I think we're going to be able to kill through. And now I'm just doing damage to the mage still, and I use my scatter shot on the hunter. The reason I decided to scatter the hunter here is just to reduce some of the damage, as my windwalker's already quite low, so this could have meant that he could have died, and we are able to kill the mage here without him blocking, so therefore we win the round. That round was pretty good for us, as mage is quite easy to kill for hunter, but we did need to be careful because they have extremely high burst and glacials, so I just needed to peel my windwalker and make sure that he didn't die. And therefore, if I'm able to do that successfully, we have a very good chance of winning that round. So this round I'm against the marksman with the windwalker and I'm with the mage. So this is going to be quite difficult because the mage will get shredded by the marksman and the windwalker, but it is winnable. The previous round we lost because the mage one-shot the marksman. We could have done a better job peeling it though. I decide to just scatter the windwalker on his burst here because he's not really going to get poly damage anyway, so it's kind of worth doing. I'm now just doing my full damage into the windwalker and I use Roar of Sacrifice on myself. The reason for this is that the marksman was hitting me and marksman was able to do quite a lot of damage to me by himself. Then also I kill the healing tide from the shaman as this is a large point of his healing. And I'm now just trying to run away from the windwalker. You don't really want to tank as much damage as a BM hunter in a shuffle, so you just need to try and run away as much as you can. I decide not to trinket this stun because my priest domes, and although I do get knocked out, I get knocked out quite late, so I'm not going to take that much damage anyway. I now use my scatter on the marksman to try and reduce some of the incoming damage. I try and get a trap on the shaman, but because I accidentally gave him precog because of the spirit walkers, it didn't land. Now we have Roar of Sacrifice on the monk. I am going to keep hitting the monk though, just because the marksman still has all of his defenses and the monk doesn't have that much left. So I know for a fact we are going to be able to land a kill fairly soon. And now I'm just following the monk around. You'll notice that I'm staying far away, and the reason for this is that I don't want to get cleaved by the monk and I want to take as little damage as possible. I could have trapped here, but because my mage is able to get a full sheep, I didn't really need to trap, so I can just keep following the monk to try and force some extra cooldowns. The monk's fairly low here, and we are able to force a link from the shaman. I kill the link, and it's important to kill shaman totems because your team might not always be able to kill them. I then scatter the Windwalker on his fist as he's trying to chase my mage. My mage now kites into the room and the Windwalker follows. This is extremely good because now the Shaman is silenced, the Windwalker is out of his range, and I trinket the Intim so that I can land a kill here, and we are actually able to land the kill, so therefore I win the round. This was one of the harder rounds to win in this lobby because Hunter with a mage isn't normally that good. However, the one advantage you do have is that if you're able to stay alive and kite well, eventually you should be able to kill with the BM consistent pressure and the FrostMage's decent overall damage, especially during their burst, such as with Glacial Spikes. So this round I'm with the Marksman and we're against the Mage with the Windwalker. Our main target is going to be the Mage, but I decided to open on the Windwalker anyway just to start doing some damage, so that maybe we can get some of his cooldowns so that we can swap to him later on. The healer is healing the Windwalker now, so I stun him at the end of his cast into a full trap. This forces the Windwalker's karma. This means that he's now a very viable target to swap to later on in the game. And now we're just doing more damage to the Windwalker. We will swap to the Mage at some point in this game, but right now we're able to get quite a lot from the Windwalker and force some cooldowns. We get the healing tide from the Shaman, which I then end up killing, and my Marksman uses his Intim on the Windwalker. I then use my Scatter on the Windwalker as well into a half trap just to reduce some of his damage. We also get the Mage's block here because we did a swap to him, and then we get the block Master Spelled. At this point we see a Glacial. I tried to stop it with Scatter, but it was a bit too long travel time, so it didn't stop. But luckily we didn't die here. I decided to root the Zuen with a Tar Trap just to try and reduce some of the Windwalker's overall damage, and we see that the Mage has now used Altar. At this point, we decide to swap to the Windwalker because the Windwalker is annoying our healer in the back, and the mage is out of our line and with Ultra up anyway. So the swap here was good because it meant that we could keep doing damage and maybe force some extra cooldowns. I now get a full trap onto the Shaman, and we're doing damage to the mage. I trinket the Windwalker's leg sweep, and we get the second block from the mage here. At this point, we get the Master Spell, and the mage is now fairly scared because he doesn't have that many cooldowns left. My hunter has had to use Turtle here just in order to not die, and I'm able to keep full pressure on the mage and be near the Shaman as well. The mage is fairly low here, and we get Spirit Link because of this. At this point, I know that we'll win the game as long as my marksman doesn't die. I now scatter the Shaman into a half trap, and the mage is very low. I'm able to follow him around the pillar and keep doing damage. The Shaman isn't able to keep him up despite using Healing Tide, and therefore we win the round here. So this is the final round in the game, and it's me and the mage versus the hunter with the Windwalker. So our main target is going to be the Windwalker, but we can swap to the hunter if the Windwalker kites too much, or if we just don't get that many cooldowns from him. So I'm going to go in now and get a full trap onto the healer, and we're going to be able to get some damage onto the Windwalker. I also haven't used my stun yet, so I'm going to be able to stun soon if I need to. But I decided not to do it just yet because the Windwalker is full health now, so I can just save it for my next stun trap. I'm now just doing damage to the Windwalker. I scatter the marksman to reduce some of his burst, and we get the healing tide from our Shaman. So this is really good now because we're just able to stay topped as they're not killing the healing tide. I'm now running by the marksman, and I see that we get a full poly onto the priest here. I then decide that I don't need to trap because my mage is casting another poly, and I stun out of this. At this point, we've now got all of the Windwalker's cooldowns, including his Karma and his Wall. My mage has had the block, but it's not too bad because we get another block as well. I'm able to land a kick onto the priest, and even though my mage is in block, we are able to land a kill on the Windwalker here. So overall, I won 4 rounds in this game. I could have probably won 5 or 6, but one of the rounds we died in the opener, and the other one we could have probably done a better job with peeling or being able to finish earlier. But yeah, overall, this was a good lobby, so I'm happy with 4 rounds. It was a decently high MMR, so I got some MMR from this, and I also got a decent amount of CR. This lobby, I'm against a Assa Rogue, a Sub Rogue, a DH with a Mistweaver, and a Rdruid as the healers. So for this first lobby, our target will be the Assa Rogue, and for the DH at the start, our Rdruid is going to get him out of stealth so that he doesn't get me or the Rogue. So we get the DH out of stealth, and my Rdruid roots him behind the pillar. At this point, I'm just trying to stay far away from the DH, and the Assa Rogue opens on me. I now change my attention to start doing damage to the Assa Rogue. The DH gets to me, I root him, and now I run away from him. At this point, I could have decided to go trap the Mistweaver, but because we've got a full kidney on him anyway, I decided to just keep doing damage to the Assa Rogue. So I'm now doing damage to the Assa Rogue. My Sub Rogue duels the Assa, and because the Assa doesn't press any buttons, we are actually able to land a kill on him here. We also got a Cyclone on the Mistweaver, so even though he trinketed, because it was dual, he wasn't able to save the Assa Rogue. So for this next round, I'm with the Assa Rogue now, and I'm against the Mistweaver with the DH and the Sub Rogue. So our main target is going to be the DH, but we can kill the Sub Rogue if he uses, say, Evasion and Vanish early on. So I just send my pets in and start doing damage to the DH. I stun the Mistweaver into a full trap, and we get Blur from the DH as well. The DH also reverses my trap. So now I'm just staying far away so I don't get cleaved here. We get a kidney onto the Rogue so that we don't die. I also sack my Rogue just so he lives. I then silence the Mistweaver here to try and force some extra cooldowns from them. We get a full clone onto him, and I'm just doing damage to the DH. The DH then dashes away so my Rogue can't hit him, so my Rogue starts hitting the Sub Rogue instead. We get a kick onto the Mistweaver followed by a DR blind, and I follow this up with a trap. This forces his trinket, and we get the cocoon onto the Rogue. The DH also has to use Nether Walk here. We now know that we're in an extremely good position because I don't really have that many defensive left, so I use my pet increased health followed by exhilaration to keep my pet alive, and now I'm just doing full damage to the Demon Hunter. The Mistweaver doesn't have a trinket anymore, so we know that we're going to be able to land a kill fairly soon. So I put a flare onto the Rdruid to stop the sap, and I'm just doing full damage to the DH. We get the DH's darkness here, and I land a full trap onto the monk. He doesn't have a trinket, and the DH is very low with the darkness ending, so we are able to land a kill on the DH here, and this one is the round. So this round I am with the DH and the Mistweaver, and we're against the double rogue with the Rdruid. So our main target is going to be the Assa Rogue, but we will just hit whatever to try and force cooldowns. So I start on the Assa Rogue, and I see that they kidney my DH, so I sack him. Then one of the rogues comes and kidneys me as well. At this point I don't really need to use much aside from my Fortitude of the Bear, just because they're splitting, so yeah, it's not going to be that dangerous. Get the evasion from one of the rogues, as well as the duel onto my healer. Here I get cocooned, and I turtle as well, so this wasn't really necessary. But it happens in Shuffle, especially as there's no communication. I get a full trap onto the Rdruid, and this forces his trinket. And now we're just doing damage to the rogues. One of the rogues jumps down, so I don't decide to follow him because if I get stunned downstairs, we don't really have that much defensive left, so it might be a game over for me. But now one of them vanishes, we get a leg sweep on him whilst he's vanished, so when he's out we're able to keep doing damage to him. He cloaks, and now we've got both the cloaks and the evasion out of the way. We know that we'll be able to win fairly soon. We get a ring on the Trank which stops the healing. I get a DR trap onto the Druid here, and he doesn't have Trinket. The Rogue is very low, so we are able to land a kill on the Rogue here. This game I'm with the Mistweaver and the Sub Rogue, and we're against the Rdruid with the DH and an Assa Rogue. So our main target is going to be the Assa Rogue, but I'll start on the DH just to make sure that I get the eye so he doesn't get my Rogue out. My Rogue stays back, so he's able to get an opener. He gets some CC onto the Rdruid with a kidney, and then a cheap shot onto the Rogue. I also managed to force Blur from the DH as well. We get the Tranquility from the Rdruid, and my Monk then knocks him down, and I'm fairly fine. I get a Cocoon on me now, and then I follow a stun into a trap on the Rdruid. This does get reversed, but it's not too bad because we follow this up with a blind. But because the Rogue is healthy and in evasion, he doesn't need to use Trinket. So this wasn't the best go ever because we used blind and we didn't get a Trinket out of it. But it's not too bad because now the Rogue drops low, we get Darkness, Cloak, and we've already had evasion now. So we're just able to keep doing damage to the Rogue, and we know that he's going to die fairly soon. The rest of the Druid has also used his Incarn here, and he's in Broccoli form. We get a Gouge into a Trap, or a DR Trap, sorry, and then we get full stun by the DH. I could have trinketed this, but I decided to stay safe and not, because I know eventually we'll win, so I don't want to have to overcommit and then potentially die. We get a stun onto the Rogue here, and we're able to just finish with damage, even though the Druid isn't in CC. And so this round, I'm with the Rdruid with the DH and we're against the double Rogue with the Mistweaver. So our main target is going to be the Assa Rogue. My DH gets sapped in the middle, which is kind of unfortunate, but it's not the end of the world. I play a little bit back in order to try and find the Rogue, as I imagine they would be trying to find my healer. Get a full stun trap onto the Mistweaver and he's out of range report, and this gets his Trinket Cocoon. We also got the evasion here from the Rogue, and they've committed a smoke bomb. So this means that we're in an incredible position because we don't really have to get that many more cooldowns before we can kill. I now run out of the bomb and I'm just doing full damage to the Assa Rogue. They blind my Druid and he trinkets this and I BM as well. I'm now just hitting the Rogue on top and we get a full clone onto the Mistweaver. This is the fist weaving Mistweaver, so he only really does damage when he's doing damage, so it's fairly easy to counter him. Just CC him and then we should be fine. I decided not to trinket the stun, even though I could have done, because the Rogue is in stealth and we won't really get any extra cooldowns if I trinket anyway. It's not worth it. I flare my Druid here so that the Rogues cannot sap. And I'm just doing damage to the Assa Rogue. The Mistweaver is able to keep them top because he's able to do damage. I decided to turtle here because they get a DR gouge onto my Druid, and I know that we win fairly soon, so I don't want to end the game and just die. The Rogue manages to get a vanish, but the DH finds him out as he doesn't really have cloak or evasion to stop damage, and therefore we're able to land a kill on him here. So overall this lobby went pretty well for me, but there were some things that I needed to make sure that I did in order to gain success within this lobby. And that is to always make sure that you flare your healer when the rogue has used their blind. The reason for this is that most good rogues will try and use a sap off the blind. This means that your healer is sitting a very long CC chain, as they can often get DR sapped again, or they can get into, say, a gouge, or the other DPS might also offer some additional CC for your healer. And this can make it very hard to live, especially if your healer doesn't have a trinket ready. So yeah, it's always important to try and get that flare down so they can't sap, and hopefully this will disrupt a lot of their CC chain. Okay, so now I'll just do an overall summary of everything that I've mentioned in the video and some final thoughts that I have on BM Hunter in Solo Shuffle. So firstly, I would say it's one of the strongest DPS specs within Solo Shuffle due to the incredibly high damage. This is damage which can't really be avoided due to the pet stone damage. You'll do a decent amount of damage as well, especially with stuff like dots, and the kill command hitting incredibly hard. So yeah, BM does extremely high damage. It's not really avoidable damage. Even if they CC your pets, you're still able to do a decent amount of damage. And yeah, oftentimes if the game is long enough, healers just simply will not be able to heal the damage which you're dealing. So if the game is long enough, you should just win eventually, because dampening and shuffle ramps up really fast. Secondly, you have really good CC potential with BM Hunter. This is with Freezing Trap, with Scatter Shot, with stuff like Tar Trap, Steel Trap, and other CC such as Intimidation. So this CC is very good, but stuff like Freezing Trap can be broken, so you do need to know when to use it, and having it broken all the time can be very punishing. whereas other classes like say DH is in prison, that can't really be broken if they run the honor talent. You can run Diamond Ice, but I normally wouldn't recommend it because there are better honor talents to run. But if you are having trouble and finding that your traps are always being broken, Diamond Ice might be the solution for you. Thirdly, BM is able to kite extremely well. The reason for this is that you don't have any cast and you can cast everything while moving. This means that you can always be pressing W and walking away from the enemies, or walking towards the enemy healer to try and get a trap. But the thing about this is that if you don't kite, you will just die as a hunter. So you do need to get good at kiting, and I would recommend just practicing kiting. Say take a few games where you don't focus on doing as much damage as you can, just focus on staying alive and kiting, because once you get good at kiting, you'll find the games are much easier, because the enemies won't be able to do that much damage to you, and the games should last longer, especially if you're the target, as you're able to draw enemies, especially melees, away from their healer, get them out of line of sight, and once they're out of line of sight, you can sometimes solo kill them behind the pillar. So yeah, that's something to be aware of. Also, you have a decent amount of support for your team. It's not as good as, say, a class like a mage, which can poly everything on DR to try and stop goes, but you do have stuff such as Roar of Sacrifice and Freedom. I'll include Scatter here as well, because this can be really good on goes just for disrupting their damage. And Roar of Sacrifice is probably one of the most helpful buttons you have as a hunter, and this will prevent the target from getting crit. So yeah, I would say Roar of Sacrifice is an extremely good button. Freedom can be good, especially offensively. For example, if your priest wants to get a fear, it's really useful. Finally, BM does really well into casters such as mages and warlock, and also certain melee classes such as DH. And in this top shuffle, there are quite a few mages. There's also DHs and Windwalkers, as well as some Warlock specs. BM does extremely well into all of these specs, and there's very few specs that BM finds really difficult to deal with. So overall, I would say BM is definitely A plus or S tier in shuffle, but it does have some disadvantages, which I will mention now. So the first one is that it's very punishing if you're unable to kite or you're unexperienced with kiting. This is the same as Hunter in general, because Hunter in general is an extremely squishy class, because you don't really have that much defensives, you don't really have that much self-healing, aside from Turtle, Exil, Wall, and stuff like Feign Death. So kiting is extremely important, you need to get good at it, and some things that I can recommend for kiting is pressing disengage when the enemies are close to you. For example, if a warrior just charges you, then disengaging away, always keeping a concussive shot up on the target, using tar trap to slow and root, using stuff like freedom so that you can get away, and try not to overlap all your movement at once. So for example, you don't always want to use disengage into cheetah into freedom, as this uses the entire of your mobility spellbook, where it might have been better to just use, say, cheetah and freedom, or maybe just disengage in freedom and then you save the other one for when you need it next. Kiting can be extremely difficult, especially if you're newer to Arena, but once you get good at it, it makes the games much easier because you'll take a lot less damage, and because you can do your full damage rotation whilst moving, you don't really miss out on any damage either. Secondly, the disadvantage is that if the games are short, BM gets extremely punished. This is also true in lobbies that just want to do damage and end the game early, or where healers are unable to keep people alive for that long. The reason for this is that BM doesn't really have any burst. It's one of the few classes that doesn't really have much burst at all. Like, most classes at least has some. BM really doesn't, even with chakrams and like bloodshed, you really don't do that much burst as BM. The upside is that you do extremely high consistent single target damage, but this does mean if the games are short, there's oftentimes not much you could do to force a kill. You're not like a DA that has extremely high burst. So yeah, you do just need to make sure that the games are lasting longer. If you're the target, you need to try and kite away so the games, uh, so the healer is able to heal you much easier. Or if they're going on your DPS, you need to help them peel as much as you can, just so that they don't die. Like, if the game is longer than a minute, then there's a good chance that you're going to be able to win or at least come very close as a BM hunter. But if the games are like, say, 20 seconds or 15 seconds, there's a very minimal chance that you'll win unless you just kill them in the opener and they don't press any cooldowns. Finally, BM can be difficult to land CC in shuffle, and on top of this, that CC can almost always be broken. You can run Diamond Ice, but I wouldn't recommend it because there are the better alternatives. But Freezing Trap can be extremely hard to land, especially on healers that have lots of ways of like getting out of it. So for example, an evoker using stasis, you have to keep this in mind. Nullifying Shroud, Priest using Death, Shamans using Grounding. So it's all stuff you have to be aware of. It's the same in actual threes, but in Shuffle it can be more punishing. Because yeah, like it's a bit uncoordinated, so you might not have a stun on the healer, say. And this can make it much harder to trap. Also, if you're playing with melees, freezing traps can just be broken instantly, so it's something to be aware of as well. Um, the other thing with trapping is that it's sometimes not even worth trapping. For example, if you're against a boomy, a warlock, and like a big caster comp, and you just need to do damage and stay back. But if you go in, you might have to stray turtle to get the trap, and normally that isn't worth it. For example, if it's the warlock, they might just dispel it, or the shadow priest might just mass dispel it if you don't have kick. So yeah, like it's knowing when to go for CC is the most important part. As oftentimes I see people try and rush in, get a freezing trap, but they'll have to swap out their wall, their turtle, their heal, just to get the trap, which then gets dispelled or broken. And at that point, they've kind of just lost the game because they have no more defensives. And even though they got the trap, so it'll look good on details, they didn't really gain anything from the trap either. The other thing is that if you get a trap, even if the enemy is behind a pillar, this might not be good. Like, if the enemy is pre-ran the go and they're behind the pillar, even if you get the trap, you might not be able to force anything with the trap, so it would have been worth just waiting, say 5-6 seconds, so you can get the enemy out in the open, stun them, then get the full trap, and at that point you could probably force some cooldowns. So yeah, overall TLDR, BM is extremely good in shuffle. It is a little bit squishy, but that's the same as any underspec in general. The damage output is insane, it's probably one of the best in the game. And finally, the CC is also really good, but it can be difficult to land, so it will take some practice to be able to trap consistently. That's all for this video, and I hope you all enjoyed. This video took me a lot longer to edit and create than I thought it would, so sorry it's out a bit later than I'd planned. I'm trying to stick to a schedule where I'll do at least one video a week for you guys. I'll be doing a video on either Double Hunter or Thug Cleave this week, so stay tuned for that. Feel free to follow me on my socials, which will be on the screen now, or you can join my Discord, and that's probably the best place where you can give me suggestions on what sort of content you would like to see. I hope you all have a great day. Peace out.